Beautiful. Excellent. Oh, excellent. Okay. Since it's being recorded, I'm just gonna jump right in,
That's right.
Darren,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm gonna be honest with you. We had given up on colors. So,
Something tells me you might have been to Cape Town.
you know what I'm saying? So, we had accepted that, okay, the deputy whites, it is what it is. We've
Um,
lost our children.
I wish I could argue with you, but there is not enough white people in the DA for in the Western Cape for the DA to be the majority. So it has to be statistically, it has to be. You know,
What do you think is the psychology behind that?
it's some classic William Lynch divide and conquer psychology at play. You know, the closer your proximity to whiteness, the closer your proximity to privilege, and so because of that proximity to privilege, you align your loyalties accordingly. Um, because in a capitalist system, there's very little benefit to aligning your loyalties to blackness, um, and so you do what you need to do or what you think you need to do in order to survive rather than to collectively overcome any systemic issues. It's nothing new, unfortunately. In South Africa we call it black and colored. In the States they would have called it house slave, field slave. It's the same cut and paste colonialist divide and conquer strategy. In many ways we are very very unique nation, a very unique society, but in terms of colonialist strategies, it's nothing new. You know, it's on the spectrum of proximity to whiteness. You align yourself to where you're going to get the most benefit in terms of privilege. It's done all over the city. I mean, all over the world. In India, a lot of it is based on the caste system. Again, skin color, in some cases, hair texture, all those kind of things. We very unique, but in lots of ways very we still just a colonized country and a colonized people trying to decolonize ourselves.
So what do you why then do we put pressure on the other children when they want to protect their bag and just focus on their livelihood?
Mm. What do you mean by the other children?
The children who are protecting GNU, the children who protect the system, the good
Ooh, that's a good
blacks,
question.
the clever
Good
blacks.
question.
Why are we putting so much pressure on them? Because we know that they're previously disadvantaged and
Yeah,
they're just trying their best to just like get out of the ghetto.
yeah.
So how do we consolidate that very real feeling with the reality
um
of their poverty?
so I'm by no means like giving colored people a get out of jail free card. Like I've been so hard on the colored people as a culture and as a group that people think I don't like colored people myself. So I'm by no means like giving them a get out of jail free card. I wouldn't ever do that, nor the GNU gang. I understand the allure, but that doesn't like get rid of any accountability. So don't get me wrong. I understand the reasoning behind it, but I'm not making any excuses for it. Because, like I said, if you go on Twitter right now, you're gonna find a few colored content creators who would call me a sellout because of how I've. They call me. They would say I speak badly about colored people. I would say I hold colored people accountable as somebody who is colored. Because you're not gonna bullshit me on the colored culture. I know I sound like I sound, but I grew up in the southern suburbs. I grew up in and around the Cape Flats. So I don't give like a whole rundown of my history and where my parents are from and where I'm from. And I don't try and give myself any sort of like street credibility, but I'm also not going to allow somebody to bullshit me because I sound the way I do and I've had a certain amount of privilege. And now you think I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. Like I know how the K word gets thrown around. I know how you prefer to align to whatever European ancestry there was. Like let's I don't need to prove myself, but you're not going to pretend I don't know what I'm talking about either. You know what I mean?
So
So
there's a
no, we're
colored
not giving.
question.
Sorry.
So basically, there's a colored question on the table.
Okay, go for it.
And that's what I'm asking. Gucci, do we have a situation? How cute is that? Do we have a situation where there is some work that the colored community needs to do?
For sure, for sure, for sure, for sure.
There's a colored, on the table, there's a colored issue that we need to unpack.
100%, 100%. And Shayman, I don't know if I would want to call it. I suppose we could for sure call it the colored question. I just see it as part of the decolonization process. I just see it as another group of people under the spectrum of black people under colonialism. If they want to align themselves that way, if they don't want to, I don't force anybody to align themselves to blackness. They don't have to do that. I'm not gonna. If somebody tells me they colored and they're not black, I'm like, okay, that's what you said. But I I just see it as a part of decolonization, and it's one of those things where like the system's not gonna help you do it. We as a people, we're gonna have to find our own feet. In terms of that process, we very seldom get help in that regard.
Even when we speak about this decolonization, I don't know how we're going to unpack it because, like you say, there's so many different strains of blackness. So, which is what came out in the Chi saga, is that there's different kinds of blacks who are thinking differently and they are passionate about how they feel.
Yeah.
So people have often said blacks are not a homogeneous group. So how do we look at Pan-Africanism and unity of black people in the circumstances that we have now?
Big questions, like we're not even 10 minutes in. It would be naive of me or anyone to try and negate somebody's lived experience and lived reality. Right? We have to accept that people's lived reality has some aspect of truth to it. But I think where we sometimes find a divide and where we get like very, very, very visceral, volatile reactions is when we try and put that lived reality into context.
Yes.
It gets messy. Because sometimes, whether it is the conversation about the colored identity, whether it's the conversation about varying levels of blackness and what must be accepted or where the line is in terms of Chi, depending on how you put that into context, people can either have an eye-opening moment of awareness in terms of where the root causes are and where we should be unified, etc., or people can dig their heels in and be like, you are not going to tell me what kind of black person to be. You are not going to tell me that I have to, as a colored person, identify with blackness if I don't want to. And so there's certain elements of truth in it, but I think because look, I don't think anybody is gonna look at you and be like, you don't want what's good for most people. You don't want what's good for the majority. Somebody would find it very difficult to prove that point with me as well. But when we start to put that things into context, that's where things start to differ. I hope that answers it somewhat.
Well, it doesn't give me the practical solution.
Okay.
Of how we're going to cover. I'm listening.
Go for it. No, it doesn't give the practical solution of how we're going to cover.
How we're going to cover the issue. Like I'm seeing a comment there from Ndombi saying that the tension, it's not Ndombi, it is, that the tension between blacks and coloreds in Cape Town, for example, is palpable. And this is a group, ideally, that should be working together so that we can achieve a collective freedom. But if the coloreds are feeling a bit fancy, And I mean, there's even, I mean, I was even watching Gayton, how Gayton responded with that Afrophobia. It reminded me of the dark skinned colored who has always been sworn at and treated badly because of his dark skin. And now I felt like he was getting a chance to unleash that venom that he received as a child onto this young lady. So, there's like, I'm just getting to the
So
comments.
I think I think the 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 question about, I think a lot of that stems from the conversation about where colored people fit into, not maybe just Southern Africa, but onto the continent. Like, where do we fit in as a people?
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, that conversation is not had as a sociological or historical conversation. It's had as a political conversation. Meaning that when we have that conversation, we more often than not talking about um, who was first and who's entitled to land. We're not having the conversation about, okay, so this was the movement of people throughout the region in the time. These were how languages interacted. These were how people were intermarrying and co-creating. We're not having that conversation from the perspective of, let's find out what genuinely happened and speak about allocation of resources and land second. We always having those conversations together. And
Even though,
because
oh,
hmm? No, no, so
no,
and
sorry, continue.
because the latest spin on the story is this made up term called Khoisan,
Yes.
which doesn't exist, was now allocated to the colored people. And the reason I say allocated is because it could have been assigned to a group of black people as well. It could have been assigned to Xhosa, it could have been assigned to Zulu, could have been assigned to Tswana. You could have assigned, because there's Kwe and Kam DNA probably in almost all of us to some
All of
extent.
us.
So
Yes.
so the fact that you assigned it to one political category, to one political grouping, was very intentional. And that's what I'm saying. When we're having the conversation about the colored identity, we're not having that conversation from a sociological or historical perspective. We're having it from a political perspective. And I know I'm going the long way around, but the reason I'm saying this is because if we can have it from the real perspective and then just accept where our ethnicities have come from, where we fit into the spectrum of blackness, where we fit in terms of the continent, or where we don't fit in, and how we found ourselves here, which is also acceptable. And then have the conversation about um, monetary gain, financial gain, political gain, entitlement to land, and everything separately. I think it would be a much cleaner conversation. But more often than not, this conversation is had in terms of who must get preferential treatment in terms of equality, who must get preferential treatment in terms of justice, who must get preferential treatment in terms of who's entitled to what. And so it gets ugly because people are struggling. And so if you now try and post 94, post democracy, quote unquote, dispossess people of an identity that they were told by the apartheid government entitled them to something that the apartheid government wasn't going to give them in any case, but in theory had entitled them to something, and now you try and dispossess them from this identity. It's bound to get ugly, and it's designed that way. It's designed that way. Because remember, the theory was we found this place empty, and the only people who were here were the Khoisan, and the Khoisan are mostly have died out, and the only people who remotely have some kind of DNA or link to them are colored people. How convenient.
Yep. Very convenient. Very. It kind of feels like a divide and conquer sort of.
And that's my concern.
Because
I
ultimately,
hmm?
uh-huh.
No, go for it. Ultimately,
I was saying ultimately, amakhala dabantu. It's the same group of people. People forget that just like a virus, human beings are also multiplying. So eventually we all come from one source. And these people, colored people, look exactly like us. So now what is this Okay, so let me move on to, we're talking about colonialism, we're talking about capitalism, right? And sometimes I saw some people attacking you about, Bati, you are a communist, but you are a capitalist. And I kind of felt a little bit like Africans don't realize what economic freedom is. Their concept of livelihood and jobs, in our minds, it's only a white man who can provide for us to have livelihood. So when you are self-sustaining, and I've experienced the same challenges, like they look down on you, whereas actually you don't have a boss. So what is it about us that we can't move from this mind state where we think that white people are going to be our saviors?
So the first misconception is that people think under communism there's no business. I don't know why. People people think under communism and socialism that the private sector doesn't exist. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know where they learned that. To me, it just exposes the lack of understanding of the systems. That being said, I don't tell people how I generate I don't tell people all about how I make money. One, because it's none of their
Yes,
business. Two, because people are
yes,
weird and crazy. You know what I mean?
yes.
So I make public what I want to make public.
Mm.
That being said, um I don't know. I think there's a lot of indoctrination around communism and socialism.
Yeah.
People always throw out the same things: Cuba, Venezuela, and maybe one or two other global South countries. Almost all of which have been completely sabotaged by the West, or sanctioned, or bombed to bits and pieces, or they were coups, or they assassinated people, whatever the case is. So I think we also need to educate ourselves. I'm trying to be very respectful because sometimes
Yeah.
people just say things from a place of ignorance when they say things like that, because it's like
They got the communism meaning from the same place they got Pan-Africanism.
yeah,
It's the same school.
yeah,
So do you want to unpack it for us? Because we do have my babies are here and they love to learn. So then
sure,
what is communism? What is Pan-Africanism? Maybe we break down these
okay.
concepts in a way that people
So
can understand.
okay, so let's start with the big one which everybody defends, which is capitalism, right? Under capitalism, you as an individual or as a private entity, you can own as much land and business as you can buy, right? Because there's ideally it's seen as free market. There's no regulation on it. The problem is that capitalism leaves room for oligopoly or monopoly, which we see in this
Yes.
country.
Yes.
Four banks, 4 or 5
Yes.
telecommunications companies, 4 or 5 major finance institutions, 4 or 5 major clothing retailers, 4 or 5 major food distributing companies. So we experience an oligopoly under capitalism, and that's what it ends up in, because you are free to do that. When you are free to buy as much land or property, or just take as much of the means of production as you are free to, people do that. And so that's what happens under capitalism. It's not the problem of business in and of itself. It's that it is allowed to remain unchecked. And so if me and you start a company in the clothing sector, right?
Mm.
And so the understanding is that under capitalism there's room for competition, and competition will bring prices down because people are fighting over price, yes?
Mm.
But now let's say in Siki one day me and you decide we're tired of fighting over price, man. Why don't we just combine our companies and corner the market? We can set the price of clothing because it's just us. We can set the price of telecommunications. We can set the price of home loans. We can set the price of financial institutions. We can set the price of telecommunications. Because why must we fight with each other over price when we can come together and set the price? This is the problem with capitalism. That there's nothing that stops people from doing that. So the private sector can own the means of production. They are free to do that. This is the problem, and this is what we end up with, right? That's the one part. And then the second part is, and I know I'm harping on about capitalism, but I want us to understand capitalism very in detail because we live in it. So if you don't want to understand communism and socialism, at least understand capitalism, right? The second part of it is that capitalism is often slapped on top of colonialism, meaning capitalism,
Yes.
in a perfect world, right? In a perfect world, everything goes according to plan. What that means is it is collusion and it is price fixing and it is illegal, but they still do it. So tell me how that works. Sorry, it was a comment in the comment section. Somebody was saying like it's price fixing, it's collusion, it's illegal, but they do it all the time and nobody can do anything about it.
Yep.
Anyway, um, so capitalism is often slapped on top of colonialism, and so what I mean by that is, in a perfect world, in a perfect world, what capitalism would be like is we all have access to the same level of education. We all have access to the same level of resources. We all have access to the same level of transport and housing and all those kind of things and food and knowledge, right? And then because we all have access to the same opportunities, if you work as hard as the next person, you should then, in theory, get the same opportunities as them. And if you work less hard than them, you would get less opportunities. Because if you want to be a
Yeah.
doctor, you study hard, you maybe get a bursary, or you get a job that can pay you whatever, you go and you become a doctor. Perfect world, right? But you need money to do that, and so you need to be earn money to do that, and land, etc. But now when capitalism is slapped on top of colonialism, you have somebody who has come into the game before capitalism exists through violent means. They've taken all the land and means of production, and in some cases people, they've taken it all, right? Now that they have all the means of production, they say compete. Now, but it's unequal. It's unequal in terms of education. It's unequal in terms of space, in terms of literal distance to jobs and everything else. It's unequal in terms of nutrition. So you don't know how if you're even developing the same in terms of health. It's unequal in terms of access to business resources and everything. So it's set up on an unequal page. So capitalism is already dodgy because it leaves an incentive to after you're tired of competition, it leaves an incentive to form conglomerates. But now, before that's happened, a conglomerate is already there in the form of white monopoly capital who has everything, and now you expect it to compete. And so that's the first problem, not just with capitalism in and of itself, but that capitalism is thrown on top of colonialism, and then you expect it to compete. So it really doesn't work. Do you want to go on to socialism and communism? I know it was a mouthful.
No, it's
So with
fantastic. We are here to learn.
Yeah. So with socialism, the idea is that the means of production are owned by the workers, right? So workers in a factory are then seen to be the decision makers around how much the workers get paid, and what you set the price at, because the workers then have a vested interest in, if we make things too expensive, we're going to run out of business. If we make our labor too cheap, we're not going to get paid enough. So the means of production are then owned by the workers, or the regulations around the means of production are set by the workers. With communism, it's more seen, and what you would also do under socialist policies is that you would reinvest. So this is where capitalism and communism start to overlap. But let me jump to communism. So with communism, the means of production would then be owned and run by the state, but then you would depend on the state's good nature and the state running. So with capitalism, you hope that the private sector is going to do the right thing. With communism, you hope that the state is going to do right by you. In some instances, they do. In some instances, they don't. But with communism, the state would then own the means of production, especially like some very high important sectors. And you hope that they're going to do right by you. The reason I personally like socialism is because socialism simply says, if you do the work, you own the means of production. If you work in the factory, you decide how the factory runs. You work in the mine, you decide how the mine runs. You work in the clothing factory, you decide how the clothing factory runs. Whereas under capitalism, somebody can come invest money and they can decide how it runs, and they'll never have to do the work. Under communism, you have the other end of the spectrum where the state decides how it runs, and you have to hope the state does right by you. And so socialism kind of sits in the middle where the worker makes those decisions. Um, There's a few overlapping points, but that's the broad strokes. Means of production owned by private individuals, means of production owned by workers, means of production owned by the state. Capitalism, socialism, communism.
And then the other elephant in the room, Pan-Africanism. We saw that in the Chichi debacle, the word Pan-Africanism was thrown around, and a lot of the time you could tell that people don't really know what it means.
Depending on who you ask, they'll have a different definition. If you ask me, European countries most of the time can't stand each other. The Irish don't like the British don't like the French, the Scottish don't really like anybody, the Italians or the Spanish can't stand the British always coming over, the Italians like very little. Do you know what I mean? There was the 100-year war. The Europeans have never liked each other as a collective, right?
Yes.
But they were very, very united in their exploitation of the global south, right? Very, very united. If you speak to somebody from any European country now, Germany, UK, whatever it is, you ask them what they think of the neighboring countries, the countries that I can't fucking stand them. They'll tell you it's fine. But when it comes to exploitation on economic terms, very clear agenda, very clear on the economic policy, very clear on their foreign policy. So Pan-Africanism, to me at least, Pan-Africanism means simply that if we as a continent want to own and control our means of production, own and control our resources, own and control our labor, we have to be united in our stance against Western imperialism. And the reason I say have to is because it's not optional. The West has repeatedly shown how one country at a time, if you stand up with the Congo or Libya or whatever other country or Zimbabwe or whatever it is, if you stand up against Western imperialism, if you try and claim the means of production, if you try and expropriate your land and give it to indigenous people, there will be sanctions, there will be boycotts, there will be assassinations if necessary. And so it's always so with my definition of Pan-Africanism in terms of getting on the same page in terms of standing against Western imperialism so we can control our own destinies, that I don't need us to be kumbaya as a continent. I don't expect that to happen. If you read Tariq Patrick Malay's book, The Lie of 1652, he'll speak about how I can't remember at what point in history it was, but he says like it was a few thousand years before the biggest grouping of a group of African people was like 5,000 people. Even 5,000 people in one group was like, that's a lot of people together. You know what I mean? So it wasn't as if we were like this one unified millions of people jumping around in a circle. That's never the case. I don't expect that of us. We are very diverse people, prone to skirmishes and disagreements and everything else. But on this one topic, let's not be idiots, man. Do you know what I mean? The West has repeatedly said, listen, as long as you can stay separate, we can pick you off one by one and make an example. Now people are even like, naive enough to repeat things like, you see what happened to Zimbabwe? Mention the sanctions. Mention deliberate and intentional sabotage by Western countries when they made a move. It was an example. Now we use that example out of context and we think like, hey, we talk about the rest of the African continent in an insulting manner, particularly countries that have taken a very intentional stance against the West. They've taken a very intentional stance, and now we use them as a negative example. Apart from disrespectful, it's a bit naive. And so, to me, Pan-Africanism again is unity against imperialist power, because it's not optional. If we want liberation, we don't have a choice. We must decide what we want. Yeah. So
it just seems so. Hey, because one thing I like about our democracy is that at least we've got space to vent. Because in some of these Muslim countries, we would not have even a chance to even have this conversation. But where to from the conversations, you know? How do we start organizing ourselves?
So, as far as I know, right, between Botswana, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, I think they've actually started to facilitate kind of you can travel with just an ID, and you can kind of move around, and it makes it easier to do business across the borders, and to integrate your economies, which is cool. I think it's cool. And so I think those things are really valuable. I know banks are slowly trying to sabotage that. I think our local banks are now making it such that if you want to make payments to banks, to one of our neighboring companies, it must be done through a Swift payment now. It won't be done immediately, so it'll become more expensive, it'll take longer, those kind of things. I think that's sabotage. I think our private sector is against us. But I think those kind of initiatives are valuable. I think um that kind of movement can be beneficial. I'm not talking about illegal immigration before anybody goes on gets on my case. I'm talking about
Yes.
um I'm talking about the region doing business and integrating with each other, so that we have a vested interest in standing against Western imperialism. It's not going to be as simple as, okay, if something goes south, we must have each other's back. Okay. No, we need to be, our fates need to be tied. So that there's a vested interest in us looking after each other. And again, it's not optional. Um, yeah.
I see here Fred Bantu saying freedom of speech is under attack, and you see that in the new laws, even there when they were saying that whoever's the administrator of the WhatsApp group will be sued. So you can see that the system and the government is actively trying to stop people speaking. So, I mean,
Without saying too much, I don't think that the Minister of Communications being a DA minister is accident. Yeah.
just like the
I
Home
mean,
Affairs one, huh?
so listen, this is the same DA that's paying a PR company 300,000 rand a month, a PR company in the US, to get favorable public relations there. This is the same DA that when we were accused in 2022 of supplying weapons to Russia, they had said like, yeah, we were guilty of it. Like, how you sell your own country out? Anyway, so I'm a bit concerned as well, to be honest with you, when it comes to freedom of speech. Um,
You know, it's so deep because DA is the toxin in South Africa. It's the source of all economic and social injustices. And isn't it amazing how the system has somehow made it seem like other black people are the problem? But actually, when you look at it, DA owns the economy. So everybody has to toe the line to DA because they've got the money. Even ANC gets money from about DA.
so one of the things that I spoke about, I think on the live last week, and I said, very important word for us to become familiar with is controlled opposition. If I need something from you and you don't want to support me, it is in my favor that I am seen to be fighting somebody who I'm not really fighting, and control the fight between me and that other person. So to you, it looks like there's a genuine fight going on, but on this side, it is controlled opposition. So I think the DA has always been controlled opposition,
Yes.
um, and I think um, I'll never get over learning about Mandela going on that tour with Harry Oppenheimer. I had a conversation with my dad a few weeks ago, and I was like, Daddy, when you were younger, right? I asked him, because like, how old were you? About like 92, 93, 94. I was like, when you were younger, do you remember this tour? Like, do you remember this tour happening? Like, this like little parade that Mandela went on to various business people, like with Harry Oppenheimer, with like this little guy, and he's like, "Yeah, I remember." And then somebody else was in the room with him who was slightly younger, and she also said like, "Yeah, I remember that. I remember that. I didn't understand the significance at the time, but I remember." And I was like, "That's wild.
Shit.
That's crazy."
We've been bamboozled.
I didn't know, because it's one thing to like to read and learn. So I saw this comment from Tato. Um, because I think what many of us believe, what I believe for a very long time, is that the ruling party had become corrupt. Like they had turned corrupt, like things had gone sideways. Like there had been some error in judgment. And then when I looked at that, and then I did some more digging and I did some more reading, and then I found out how common knowledge this was. Like everybody knew about this little tour, this little parade in front of the business people and the trips to the UK and all those things. And I was like, what is going on? I I I was like, you can't tell me this was normal from
But you
yeah.
know, no, I shouldn't have disturbed you there. Sorry about that. I always say that Mandela's seeds always show that he was not woke or conscious at all. Because, I mean, what kind of a home you grew up in shows. And the conscientization of, it's not by accident that me and my siblings all have similar politics, because we were raised in a conscious home where we knew the black politic end. So when you look at the Mandela children and the grandchildren, I mean, the rest of the country is calling Madiba Dada and they're calling him granddad. So already that says, this was a plant. I just do always feel strongly with, hey guys, you know what? When you look at the seeds of the Mandela family, besides Winnie and Zolega.
Yeah. I got some very ugly reactions on Twitter when I mentioned that. Very, very ugly reactions, which I was fine. I was okay with. I'm not used to get. I'm not like, I'm used to getting those kind of reactions. I was just, as somebody who the depth of this was relatively new to, I didn't know what to say, because I don't know how people can justify that. I don't know how you can justify rubbing shoulders with somebody who had taken over a mine from Cecil John Rhodes, who had intentionally exploited illegal immigrants to get around labor issues and use them for the benefit of their mine, and then had those diamonds processed in another apartheid state, Israel. What do you mean? This is the devil they were shaking hands with. I don't understand how. Yeah,
and
that was.
what about CR17? That's also Madiba magic.
I'm still stuck at Marikana, even, to be honest with you.
That's exactly what I was gonna go next.
I'm still stuck at Marikana.
Yeah.
And then one of the things that I really took personally, not to diminish the tragedy that was Marikana, but one of the things, just because I was it was so close to home in so many ways. Uyinene's murder, the protest that came after that was ridiculous protest that brought the city to a standstill, the CBD. And then Ramaphosa made a speech and he spoke about a bunch of things, and he said there will be no bail for rapists, there will be no bail for this and all those kind of things. Didn't deliver on a single promise. And just that, to like in real time, it's one thing to experience something before you are somewhat politically conscious, or to read about something before you were somewhat politically conscious, and then it's another thing to have one of those instances play out in front of your eyes, like to be there for that promise being made, and then to watch that promise being to not come to fruition, and then to watch yourself as a society just be blue ticked on the promise when you were like, hey, you said this, and he's just like, okay, no, don't mess with me, don't waste my time.
Do
It's just a
you know
new
that?
revelation. Yeah. Go
Do
ahead.
you know that Cyril Ramaphosa has never gone to Marikana, has never spoken to the families?
It doesn't surprise me. I think it's disgusting, but it doesn't surprise me. Um, if I were him, I wouldn't do it either. I don't know what the people's reaction there would be to him. Um, I think sometimes you can lie about things, and then other times, you know you're guilty so badly, you just know better than to step into where your crime scene is.
Wouldn't it have been better for his PR to own up and like just be extra and do things in Marikana and rebuild? And would that not have been better for his
I
own
think
legacy?
Cyril is. I think Cyril Ramaphosa is a very successful president in what his mandate is.
Yeah,
You know, and so I don't think that's his
yeah.
mandate. Um,
Oh, black people are not his mandate.
no, 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 no. I don't think that's his mandate, and I think in terms of what his mandate is, he's done very well. He's done very well. Um,
So
hmm.
one of the things that I mean, when we speak about CR17 and how well he's done, his wellness is going to affect white capitalists the most, and that's why white people are so excited about him because he brings them wealth. But I don't think that black people have realized that he is bringing them wealth at the expense of black people. So we saw now unemployment is rising. In this last quarter, it went up. And it feels as if black people are so caught up in the GNU PR, they don't realize what the impact of it means. It
Mm,
means when DA is running things, now they're going to privatize water because they've been trying to privatize water for so long.
mm.
They want to privatize natural resources. You know, there's so many things we need to talk
Yeah.
about. What about white farmers who have got water bodies on their land? That's
I
ridiculous.
mean, when Andre de Ruyter, the former CEO of Eskom, said electricity was too cheap, they were applauding him. They were applauding him. So I fully agree with you. Look, the idea is, you know how people who are apartheid apologists, they always reference how strong the dollar to the rand was
Mm.
back in apartheid. Um, they have no issues with human rights violations.
Mm-mm.
That strong rand dollar exchange was on top of the blood of human rights violations. So they have no problems with that. No problem valuing the currency highly with that. So the reason I'm saying this is because the mandate there is to get as close to slavery as you can without calling it slavery. Um, which is why one of the policies that the DA has is to have this exemption certificate, they call it in their manifesto, where if you've been unemployed for a certain amount of time, you can waive your right to a minimum wage. You can also waive your right to certain hiring and termination clauses as well. So it's easier for you to be hired, or like the how you get fired. You must actually have
Cheap
people must have a
labor.
look at the policy. Not just cheap labor, but you can opt out of some of the basic conditions of employment. Um, yeah, and so you can essentially get as close as you can to a slave without calling it a slave. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because when you talk about unemployment, like that unemployment figure is not just a figure that lets you know like what's going on in the country. It's also a very useful fear mongering tactic to bargain to get labor cheaper.
Yes.
And so I think that a lot of our employment issues are intentional underemployment. because when you have a big pool of labor to choose from, you make it cheap. Remember supply and demand. If there's high supply, demand is low and price is low. It's a basic economic principle that they teach us. So the more people you have unemployed, the more people you have to choose from, the cheaper their labor is. You can't have people unemployed all over the place and then have cheap labor. You can't have that. It's bad for capitalism. um, yeah, it's
There
a
was a
very
comment here about they hoping that we'll talk about how the media speaks on black corruption and how they speak on white corruption.
I would like for the day to come. So I was speaking to somebody about a security guard that I know, um, who hadn't been paid by his employer for a while, but he's part of a bigger group, like a very formal security company that is subcontracted by the body corporate at this place, right? And hadn't paid the security guard. Now, mind you, the tenants in the complex, they pay levies, and part of those levies is the security that gets employed at the complex, right? And so when they don't pay that security guard, where does that money go? That's corruption. But we don't think of it as corruption. We think of it as like, they're not paying him. But if levies are being paid towards a service and the service provider is not getting the money, then you are siphoning funds in a different direction. Now, this is just one very small example. And so we throw the label of corruption specifically on black people, specifically on politicians. But when it comes to the private sector, and we talk about how somebody had worked X amount of time and they've worked overtime and they didn't get paid for it, and this is just something that happens in the business, like how we don't get overtime. Is that not corruption? you know, I would like for us to see corruption in the private sector as much as we see corruption in the public sector as well, or even crime, if you want to call it that, would be quite nice.
Well, it doesn't get reported because they own the media.
I felt like I felt like I was being naive. I think I said this on Sizwe's show. I said I'd always known, and I'd been told, and I'd read about it in books, about how the media can control narratives. You even hear about it in music. People rap about it and they sing about it. Like how the media can lie to you and how they can control the message and all those things. And then you start seeing it in real time, like, because the one example that I used in when I was live with Sizwe is that I had watched something and I had seen how the debate had gone down, and then I saw how the media reported on it, and I was like, this is a lie. It's not like a false interpretation or like a spin. It's a lie. How are you lying? And I was like, and then the more this happened, I don't even know what to say. I feel a little bit speechless because they just lied to us.
They lie.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
It throws me off a little bit.
I know they lie.
Yeah.
Thanks, Unati. Let me check out some more comments. We appreciate that. Yeah, there we go. How's that comment?
Those who came back from conscription automatically based in management.
I mean, isn't this cadre deployment? DA also does cadre deployment.
Yeah. So, do you know what? I was checking out the business earlier, and then I looked at the management of the business, then I looked at the team of the business, then I looked at the board members of the business, and they were all white people. And then I said, what's the ratio of white people to black people in this country? And I was like, well, it's 1 to 8, 1 to 9 if you want to include colored people. I was like, the ratio is 1 to 9. And so if there is a website and there's 20 people on this website and only 2 of them are black or colored, why is there so close? Why is there so many of you in one place all at once? when the ratio is 1 to 9, how is this possible? What are you all doing together? Like, why are you not more sparsely distributed? That to me is like,
yes.
That's cadre deployment. How is it possible? You know what I mean? Apartheid was so long ago. How is this possible?
I'm seeing this comment here by Lebu saying that I'm media. And I actually like this point because media like me is not going to be supported. What white people want is to go fetch. Who are those people from Newsroom Africa? Darren's laughing. The presenters who suddenly became managing directors miraculously. 1 minute they were presenting Gospel Gold, the next minute they own a whole media house, right? So white people know how to pick and choose those of us that they can push their agenda through. So even Newsroom was a response to ANN7, which was when we really had black media reporting. And then now white people had to come and intercept that narrative and create another ANN7, apparently, but it actually wasn't, because those bosses at news, we don't even know them. If you're in industry, especially in media, like it's such a public platform, we should have seen you move up the ranks, and we would know your mind or how you think, or how it's you would have some kind of legacy. But listen, you were a presenter of a gospel show, and now you are owning a media house. Do you understand? On a mainstream platform. So, I mean, how are we going to break this thing down where white people know how to choose Abo Anele, Punang? They know how to choose who to choose, who's going to distract people from real issues.
Yeah, I was speaking to a group of students from University of Free State yesterday, and I said that somebody had accused me of being a paid mouthpiece, and I said nobody pays anybody to speak about land. Nobody pays you to speak about taking land back, though.
Yeah.
And I said I said I had accepted very early on, when having these conversations, that I wasn't ever going to be the kind of influencer who's going to get some KFC campaign or anything like that. So it's always interesting to be labeled as part of the mainstream when the message is so against what makes money in the mainstream.
Yes, and I don't think people really realize the sacrifice one makes when you can tell that I've got a platform, but I'm not going to get paid to mess with black people. And some people are willing to take the money. I mean, remember the COVID vaccines. We mustn't talk too much about that because YouTube doesn't like it. But if you remember that there were social media influencers who were willing to tell people to take this thing that nobody even know what's going to happen to them. And now people have died. People have got these after effects and nobody's doing anything. Like, you understand? So
yeah, it was a crazy time, especially now that some of those pharmaceutical companies have come out and said, like, oops.
Right? How would it be like oops when people died?
Thank capitalism. Thank capitalism for that. Yeah, it's been an all-around crazy time, to be fair.
Hey, so it's rough. I mean, sometimes I obviously can relate to you a lot, so I'm really enjoying this conversation.
No, it's fine.
Because I actually was thankful when I saw that there were younger people coming behind me who also are ungovernable and saying the same stuff. It kind of vindicated me and showed that actually, no, I'm not crazy. Here are other young people saying the same thing and seeing the things the same way. So I think that people really undermine the sacrifice. Because I mean, I even look at sometimes that castle mixed out conversation thing reached out the one time, and I was like, shit, this is alcohol. It's alcohol. So I'm gonna sit there with an alcohol brand.
Oh, do you not work with alcohol brands?
I've said no to money so much because I was like, South Africa's got an alcohol problem, and this is what the system is using. So if I'm sitting there and then there's alcohol branding there, I'm just like, you've lost the plot, babe. You've lost. But the thing is that then how do people like us make a living? Because we are vocal, we are broadcasters.
I don't drink, so I don't think I would. I wouldn't endorse alcohol brand either. I feel like I have to be disingenuous.
Yes.
What do please agreeing?
They already won part two, these ones. They can see that we're 5 minutes to go. So there is some kind of integrity and principles that you've got to have. So the reason you don't do alcohol advertising is the same reason that you would not have taken a vaccine promo, because you're like, wait a minute, Gandhi, what's my role here? And I just find it amazing how, especially the black market, can't see that the same people get used to fuck with us. Like,
Hey.
there are GNU artists and poets and presenters, and there are GNU. I just always see in your face that I'm going out of line.
Do you know what I've learned with especially with the Chidima situation?
Yeah.
One of the things that I know about that I have learned to appreciate is insight in whatever form it comes. And so I think that when you get an insight into how far we are in terms of what we need to do to get on the same page, to unify and to form a collective to stand against imperialism, right? When people show you where their pain points are, or when people express their dissatisfaction, because I know like the system likes to throw a spanner in the works, but the fact that the spanner was thrown in the works and it was successful is an indicator for us as to how much we still need to do and what we need to work on and where our weak points are. So I know we sometimes, and I understand it, like our knee-jerk reaction is to be like, we're still so far from getting to where we need to be. But it's also a very nice acid test to show us, okay, this is where we are. This is where we are in terms of reaching critical mass. This is what we need to work on. These are pain points. These are where we need to educate people. This is where we have different perspectives. This is where we need to better create context. And so for me, at least as a content creator, and as somebody who's trying to educate other people as much as I'm trying to educate myself, there was a lot of insight that was gained in that process. And so as much as some of the people who watch my content and might have disagreed with me, I was learning from them as much as they were disagreeing with me as to what their interpretation is and what their perspective is on things. And it's like, okay, so that's where not me or them, but that's where we as a society need to do work. And I'm very accepting of that. I think we all should be as well. And I don't think we should let the system win like that. You know what I mean? Like when they do things like that, we should take it as a win. Because if they didn't, we wouldn't know. We would think everything's okay. So I was like, thank you for doing some of the work for us. Thank you for doing a nice review, a nice little service along the way, to show us where we still need to check our weaknesses. So I'm fine with that. I think we should all be. As much as it was a polarizing moment, we should also see it as like, okay.
It was a learning moment, definitely. Definitely, because you could actually hear, I mean, the people's concerns were valid. We do have an immigration system problem. We do have kidnapping. We do have drugs problem coming from illegal immigrants. They were right. It's just that to take it out on this poor little girl who's 23 years old, the entire country jumping on top of her, that was just not the approach. So I just think that everybody was right and wrong.
Let me grab my charger. Give me like 1 minute, and then I wanna actually comment
no
on
problem.
something.
Guys, thank you so much for joining tonight's live session. We are wrapping it up now. Thank you for being so engaging in the comments, guys. You're such superstars. Thanks, Onati, for the money. Thank you very much, Tafagi at time. I really appreciate that, and you guys know that you can support the channel. Obviously, you know that I'm not going to be getting the sponsorships from the whites. So please, guys. So, what I wanted to ask. Yes, let me listen.
So just on what you were saying about Chidima, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people's pain points were, and I'm going to try and approach this with a lot of tact. So a lot of people's pain points were about what they had experienced with regards to exposure to drug abuse, exposure to abuse in general, exposure to very harsh interactions, exposure to trafficking, right? And
identity
theft, right? For sure. And so a lot of these experiences were happening in vulnerable communities, right? Majority of these experiences are happening in vulnerable communities. And because it was happening in vulnerable communities, it is allowed to persist, right? Because people like this, the state knows what's happening in those communities. They know about identity theft at home affairs. They know about trafficking of kids and people and what that stuff are. And
they're involved.
That as well. And they know about how drugs are getting to wherever they're getting, who the routes are, who the suppliers are. The state's not stupid. And so the reason I'm saying this is because the vast
No problem.
the vast majority I just need to, here we go. The vast majority of people experiencing these issues are in vulnerable communities, and they are real issues. And I think the difference in perspective is coming where people are saying we as a vulnerable community are experiencing this, and people from 1 foot in and 1 foot out or on the outside of those communities are saying you should not be in a vulnerable community.
Yes.
And I think that's where sometimes the difference is coming in. And so it's very valid what you are experiencing as a vulnerable community. And so it's like, it's very difficult because now you're trying to have the conversation and say, you should not be in a vulnerable community.
Yes.
Let's tackle the reason you are in the vulnerable community.
It's and then not Chidima's fault.
And then somebody else is saying, you don't know what I'm experiencing in the vulnerable community because you are not in the vulnerable community. And so both perspectives are trying to tackle what they are experiencing, but from a different angle. The one person is saying, protect me while I'm in this vulnerable space. Another person is saying, let's get you the fuck out of the vulnerable space. And the disconnect in that conversation was messy. But we need to find a way to have that conversation so that, like I had said last week in the live, that two vulnerable people in two vulnerable households don't go at each other, rather than asking, why are we both in this vulnerable space?
Yes. Because now we were fighting amongst each other. Yeah. Can I respond to this T-Man's comment here? I mean, I haven't read the whole thing. Let me see. Chidima had pride. That's what made South Africans angry. So let's talk about this, Personally, I feel like because South Africans have got such a low self-esteem, they get offended when they see somebody who loves themselves. And I think that when somebody is when you're saying they're arrogant or you're speaking from a place where you think you're less than. Which is why, for me, I found it was so easy to attack Nigerians, because once again, Nigerians are so bold and confident and so loud. And I feel as if once South Africans work through, because we are scared to express ourselves. We come from a history where we expressed ourselves, and it would get us killed. It would get us into trouble. So generationally, we've got a curse where we don't speak up. So when people speak up, which is the same backlash you're getting, is that it's like, how dare you have a voice? So how are we going to teach Black people that it's okay to be confident and to take up space, It's okay. You know, you don't have to be humble and like, you know, there's different types of people in the world. So we can't be punishing people for being strong and bold. I don't know how you feel about that.
Um, so I see people in this country of different heritages celebrating all kinds of ways. Like I've been all of the weddings I've been at as a colored person, not one of those weddings have been other than these European styled weddings, you know. And because so I don't think I don't like I don't know what grounds we have to object against her like celebrating her heritage, because like
It's a
the
heritage.
Western European way of celebrating year is just openly seen as, and maybe that's because of colonialism that we've like accepted it as part of how we as a diverse society celebrate. Maybe we're just not ready to accept that Nigerian foreign nationals or now becoming South Africans are part of that diverse society. Maybe we don't want to accept that. I don't know if that is the case. Um, but
Also, the
I
time
don't
of
think we have a leg to stand on.
even the time of like marrying somebody from your own township, it's finished. So people in South Africa are now marrying Ghanaians, they're marrying Kenyans, they're marrying Zimbabweans, and guess what? They're giving birth to chichis. So in a little while, it's going to be hard to tell between a thoroughbred and a chichi because we are
And
expanding.
and that's what I'm saying. Like it doesn't. I I just and it was very difficult to push back with people once Home Affairs had said there were prima facie evidence of fraud, which they have yet to give the full version of. But prior to that, the double standard still existed, and I think that was everybody's issue. I don't think anybody at any point had said like, "Hey, thumbs up for illegal immigration." I think it was always the double standard. Um, is it the surname? Is it the culture? Is it because in any case we could find a white person who had done the same thing or had an equal experience or represented themselves or whatever the case is in the same way. Um, I see the comment there. I can't speak for black people, so they would have to speak for themselves there. I can only speak for the weddings. I can only speak for the
I
weddings
heard
I've been to as a no. I was saying
I
I can only
received
speak for
your
the weddings
mouth
I've been to
like
as a colored person.
you know, where there was a comment. Actually, let me go back to this question I wanted to ask. Do you think that black psyche and black brain knows how to choose leaders?
Oof. Oh, I hate you a little bit right now. Um, I I think that as a people we know what our immediate needs are. I don't think we should be like as the media or content creators. I don't think we should ever be uh, uh, arrogant enough to try and speak on broader society. I think people know what their needs are.
Mm,
But I think what happens is that sometimes leaders can misinterpret a way to meet those needs, and then people choose leaders according to that misinterpretation.
mm.
And I don't know who that error falls with. Do you know what I mean? I don't know who that is on. Is it
I
on
think
the leader for misinterpreting, or is it on the people for not seeing through the misinterpretation?
I think that our people have lost their integrity and their principles, and they don't have rules anymore. and then they adopted this Western thing, and then in this Western thing there was PR and hype, and it taught them how to think and choose, and now they don't have a sense of right and wrong. So even now, if you look at our leadership, we've got leaders who have killed, we have leaders who've been in jail, we have leaders who swear at the electorate, we have leaders who just speak how they feel, even the way Gayton responded to that whole situation, that wasn't leaderly. That's not what a leader does. And then he's got some funny post that he puts up where he's like, I just want to thank everybody who stood by me when everybody was speaking badly of me. I'm like, shut up. You're a leader. Just shut up and focus on the things that you're supposed to be doing. It's not about your ego. We're not here to nurse your ego. You were wrong. Own it and keep it moving and do better next time. So that's why I'm wondering, do we really know, just because someone's a good business person,
no, you're not wrong. Like, no, you're not wrong. I think I gave a very diplomatic answer, and I think you've just gone straight in and been like, this is
yeah. This is a platform of the truth. Yeah, we don't lie to each other on MOYA.
No, it's there's definitely like a very big component of truth in that, because like I don't know what to say, like, when, because there's some leaders who will lie to you, and then there's some Gayton, man. Yes. I don't know.
Some leaders are matriculants. Like, when do we get to a point where you're just like, okay, guys, we've had 30 years now, and Bantu education has been phased out, and now it's time for us to, whoever has earned it here must get the job. Like, for me, it's offensive that I am better qualified as a Minister of Arts and Culture than my own minister. It's offensive, and it's been offensive. And I've never understood why we have, because they look stupid to us. When you don't know what's happening in the arts and you are the minister of it, then I'm just like, you know what, you're stupid and you don't know what you're there for. So when are we getting to a point where ministers of industries are actually leaders in that industry?
Oof. It's true. Like, I'm not even gonna try and spin it. But I still do think there is a component of people who genuinely think that, maybe not PA voters, but I still think there are a fair amount of people who are being intentionally misled by their leadership. And for those people, I genuinely feel for them. I for sure feel for them. I don't the middle class, the privileged, I feel very little for them. The working class were genuinely literally too busy to have the disposable time and resources to educate themselves on things, to understand the system and that kind of thing. For the working class, I have all the grace in the world. The middle class, not so much.
I know, right? There's the biggest sellouts. I'm busy thinking again with this leadership thing. I mean, I know people are going to be happy when I say this, but we're here watching EFF dying a slow and painful death. And if people had just stood up to Julius, we wouldn't be here. If people had just said, Julius, you can't speak like this. You can't call people things. You can't be mobilizing your fans to attack people. So I just feel as if it was created, and it was created because we didn't have what it takes to call out our leader and refine him. And now, like I say, shit is falling apart, man. It's embarrassing to even watch. We can't even talk about. I mean, there's like a moment of silence since the elections. We can't even diss them because it's so bad. You're just like, yo, damn. We just look at MK, like, So how do we groom our leaders? How do we make sure that we have leaders that don't have big egos?
Your questions are hectic, ne?
This is why they don't like me.
No, like I love these questions. I genuinely do. But these are questions, like, when you ask me a question like this, like lots of questions that I get, or like when people ask questions, that kind of stuff, then I kind of like, it's things that I can answer safely. But you asked me a question, and I'm like, wait, let me just. um, can you repeat that question? How do we groom or raise our leaders?
Yes, so that it's not about ego, because that's what it's been. And
Mm,
that's why we have both Gaten, that's why we have both Julius, that's why we have both Cyril that you can't tell anything to, because there's no
mm,
communication between leader and the electorate. The leader thinks that we're his fans. He doesn't realize that we put him there so that he can sort out our problems. We're not there to
mm,
clap for him. He's not special. He's not like we love him or no. We put you there because we felt that you've got characteristics that can fight our battle.
mm. Can I use an example that I haven't used in a long time? It's based on a series I watched.
Uh,
So there's this series. I don't know if you've watched it. It's on Netflix. It's called The Society. Um, and basically, what happens is this whole town, all the parents leave, and it's only this group of high school students that are left in the town with all the town's resources, and they need to now run the town, right?
Interesting.
So
Uh-huh.
they've got no concept of running a town. They've got no concept of leadership. None of that shit, right? So this one girl becomes the leader, and she runs things, and eventually she gets killed by a group of the people in the town who didn't like how she was running things, right? So now the town has no leader, and so the committee that was under the sister who had been murdered asks the younger sister, and they're like, listen, can you lead the town? You're the only one who understands how everything works. You're the only one who understands the infrastructure, how to manage the resources, whatever. So they asked the baby sister of the girl who was just murdered to lead the town. And she tells this committee that if I lead, they're going to kill me. And then she says, and then the committee tells her, if you lead well, we'll protect you. And I think that is the perfect three-way relationship between leadership, the people surrounding leadership, and the people, the public. So I think the public should always be so united that the leader fears being lynched by them,
Yes.
and the people surrounding leadership should always be committed enough to the leader to be
Yes.
protecting the leader only on condition that they do right by the people.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you have this three-way relationship, and I think if we can groom and train leadership enough, but that also depends on society being united. So I think if society can be so united that leaders feel fear of the public,
Yeah.
and the committee that's meant to protect leadership knows that they can only do it on condition that they do what the public needs, then you have the perfect three-way relationship. And so I think the grooming of successful leaders who aren't in it for ego need to fear the backlash of the public. But to fear the backlash of the public has to be on the same page. The public needs to be united, and
Wasn't
it's
that the
easy.
importance of, okay, sorry.
You wanna go? Wasn't that?
Wasn't that the importance of MK in the past election to shake things up a bit?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Um, I, I don't know. We need a group big enough to be able to do that. We need a group, a united group big enough to be able to put the fear of the public into leadership. It's necessary. It's
Yeah.
healthy. It's healthy for
Yeah.
society. I don't know if MK is that group, but I know we need one.
Yes. I felt as if the energy they brought was that. It's just that the leadership, you're just like, is this a Zuma family thing or what's going on? And I really think that that is really compromising MK. Also, the fact that they don't have any like vocal, strong women. They've got women, yes, and strong, but not women that we've seen fighting battles. And I think it kind of plays into uh, Dudu Zuma having a bit of a Gugitila vibe because there's an energy like that that's coming through. So I don't know. I mean, we were excited with MK, but as it's playing out, I do wish that we would see other leaders coming forward, and especially female leaders, because if Dudu Zuma is the female leader in MK, it's scary as fuck that there are no women around her. A woman
So,
who is a leader and has got no women around her is a patriarchy princess.
hey,
You see, that's what's scary, Fred.
15% of the voting base uh, is a big number.
Yeah,
But so is 9%. And
yeah.
I think again, people think that people think because I made it public that I voted for the EF, I'm incapable of criticizing them, which is not the case. Um, I am not happy with how the 15% nor the 9% have used their votes. I don't have any expectations of the ANC and the DA. I think I've made that clear. I don't. They've shown us who they are, so I don't expect them. Do you know what I mean? I don't expect you to. I don't have any expectations of people who have consistently done what they've been doing. You know what I mean? But I did and do have expectations of MK and EFF, and
Yeah.
it's. I suppose 2 months is technically still early days, but I'm not happy thus far. Those are big numbers. 1.3 million votes is a big number. I don't know what
Yeah.
MK got, 1.8, I think, something like that. Those are big numbers. Like, you need to
I
do
think
something with
MK
it.
got a lot more. I think that IEC system crashed because of MK.
Oh, I got in trouble for my thoughts and comments around the IEC over election time.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Because you know what is glaring? What was glaring for me, where I was like, nah, something's not right, was when all the political parties had funding and it was running like a machine. There were posters. It was just a little bit too perfect. You could tell good time, man, there's money behind here. And then you have to ask yourself, where are you getting money from? I mean, even PAC had money. So you can tell that Abba Oppenheimer and Abba Rupert came together and were like, okay, we need to feed our dogs so they
so
can cater
I,
for us.
there's a what's this legal terms? A lacuna or something like that. I think it's called a lacuna. The legal TikTok and legal YouTube can just correct me. But there was a lacuna in the law, and there was a window of time between I think it was about 2 weeks or 3 weeks just before the election date, where somehow the political parties had found a window where they didn't need to declare funding within that particular period. Um, and if somebody wants me to, I can dig it up. I can speak to the person who spoke to me about this, because I can't say who they work for, but they had told me about it because they track this kind of thing, and they had said that in these 2-3 weeks leading up to the elections, there was a way for political parties to get funding without declaring the funding, and there was crazy amounts of money going through there. So you're not wrong in seeing that, and your timing is not wrong as well, because that is the exact time. Um, and I was made aware of it. I just, because there was no declaration, I couldn't find anything to be able to talk to people about it. But
Mhm.
yeah.
I know, so deep. We're wrapping it up now. I saw a comment about Anilem Da earlier on, guys. I thought Anilem Da was so reckless and handled that badly, 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 badly. I don't think that a leader can get onto a video or an entire video to people and be like, what? That kind of language is not for leaders.
Oh, I
It's
remember that live.
Yeah, it's unacceptable. I mean, we all have wild emotion and stuff, but part of leadership is managing to control your emotion and how to articulate it in a way that's not going to create mob justice, which is what Gayton and Annalette did. They got that girl bullied straight. So I found that so irresponsible. It spoke to her. It told me that she's not a leader. She's an egomaniac. So I'm out. Let me see what else is there. Is there anything else you want to? Oh, Darren, they were talking about your session with Andile. I don't know if you are going to keep doing the live streams. Do you want to punt those?
I mean, if I do have another one, I'll definitely post about it. It's just I had watched his interview with Sizwe, and I really just wanted to have a conversation with him about some of his comments post election. And I thought, okay, if I'm gonna have this conversation with him, let me make it public. I thought it was really valuable, just because whatever people think of Andile, he's gonna tell you what he thinks. You know, so for better or for worse, whatever you think of his opinions, he'll tell you, and I can respect that.
Andile is the leader we need.
Listen, Andile will tell you straight, and I can always appreciate that. I enjoy speaking to somebody who I don't need to be like, but didn't you say, you know what I mean? Like, let's not bullshit each other. Let's just say, and if you and if your opinion is some wild stuff, but you comfortable with it, at least then say that. You know what I mean? I'm fine with that. Like, I'm not trying to change who you are, but at least be straight with me about who it is. And that's what I got from him, and I can appreciate that. I know lots of people didn't like that I had the conversation with him. I don't personally care. I just wanted to know what his thoughts were on what I had to ask him. And what I wanted to know is, how does somebody who is so firm on black first, land first, how do you reconcile that with being in parliament? How do you justify this? How do you see your role there? What do you see your role as? And he gave it to me straight. He was even willing to say, I don't know if you watched it.
Black first was kicked out. Like the whites literally made it impossible for Black BLF. Like they put all these literally sanctions because they are literally what we need, and we do need him in parliament. I mean, that's where, because I always like stress about how much they get paid in parliament, because I'm like, that is going to soften you up, and you're not going to speak out of line because you're protecting your 1.2 million. So
I mean, I don't know if you watched it, but he literally said, change is not going to come from parliament, it's going to come from the people. No. And I was like, and you saying this as an MP? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, you know what I mean? And that I can appreciate that kind of shit. Like, you know, I can appreciate having that conversation. So that's really what I wanted, and I have lots of respect for that, for somebody who's willing to be firm in their position. So I enjoyed the conversation.
I just love the poetic justice, how he's inside parliament after he was, they tried to humiliate him and chase him down the street in Cape Town, and he's been through so much. You know, you've seen Andile's sacrifice. You even saw him get ill, you know. So those are the kind of leaders that we need. People who are going to walk through the fire for us, not Gucci revolution.
You know, I said this to somebody the other day. I said, I don't. And funny enough, I hate that I'm going to say this, but I have to give this bra credit. Even Penwell said, he said, like, if you're gonna milk the cow, at least leave milk for other people. Don't like milk the cow. And that's my thoughts on politicians. It's like, if you want to take R1 million salary, okay, make sure service delivery is there. Make sure people's basic needs are met. Make sure people have opportunities to business. I don't. If you feel like R1 million a year is gonna make you the main person, and it's gonna feed your ego, and it's gonna do whatever. Like, if that's what you need, okay. But can you at least do what you had promised to be able to get into the position to get that R1 million salary? Then I wouldn't have too much of a problem. So yeah. If you want to wear the Gucci shoes, like, I wouldn't do it, but at least then deliver on what got you enough money to buy the Gucci shoes, please. Can we?
Because I saw the comrades are back in the Joburg office. So that was a lot. There's no one we can trust.
There's
no one we can trust. So wild. But thank you for your time then, and you can see
no
we
problem.
were so engaged.
Thank you for your
Thank
very,
you.
very difficult questions.
I'm sure we'll call you again when there is like more development, especially with as GNU is slowly falling apart. We will call you
Yeah.
again so we can just.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to have a conversation with somebody who can ask me questions that makes me go like, okay, just hold on quickly. Like, let me just.
I know, because the other interviewers are airheads because the white people chose them. Thank you to everybody who joined the live. Guys, we're about to go off now. Thank you for joining.
Yeah.
Please remember to watch all the adverts because that's how we get paid. And support the channel and share the stream. Thank you so much, Darren.
Thank you, and have a good night.
I'm just ending this.